All right.
Okay, so in this presentation, I would like for us to consider the different ways that art controls politics, whether that be for the good, such as in a way to enforce liberty, for example, or whether it be for the bad, such as the enforcement of restriction or oppression. And so the way that I would like for us to discuss this is by first looking over some key philosophical theories on the topic. So we'll look over Plato's theory of imitation first, and then we'll look over Walter Benjamin's adaptation of this theory in his book, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And then thirdly, we'll look over Richard Wagner's concept of a total work of art. And once we've gone through those, I would like to apply them in some real life scenarios. And so the first case study that we'll look over will be from Nazi Germany. And then we will look over how that contrasts in the second case study of the American Civil Rights Movement. And to preface, I would just like to give you guys some information as to why I am presenting this subject. And it's because, so recent studies have shown that fewer people now say that representative democracy is a good way to govern. As you can see, all of these different countries, what they have in common is that there's been a decline in support for a representational system of governance. And to add to that, there has actually been an increase in support for rule by a strong leader. And these results are actually quite alarming, especially if we consider them in the light of the recent presidential election. So as I present, I would just like for you guys, or encourage you guys to keep that in mind. And yeah, without further ado, I'll get into talking about Plato. So in Plato's Republic, he argues that a work of art is a copy of a form, and thereby thrice removed from truth. And this might be a bit difficult to understand if you've never heard about this theory before, but I would like for us to imagine it like this. So if we think about a chair, Plato would argue that there is one ideal form of a chair that represents its uttermost reality, so to say. And so every other chair in our environments, for example, the ones that you guys are sitting on right now, would just be a copy of that ideal form. And so then if we consider an artwork of a chair, an artwork like a painting, a drawing of the ones that you're sitting on right now, that would just be a copy of that ideal form. And what he says is that this distorts reality. But why this is important to him is that he says that this is harmful because art appeals to our emotions rather than our reason. And it's when we can see truth that we as humans are destined for some type of disaster. So in other words, you could say that art is dangerous due to its power to manipulate our emotions. And that brings me to Walter Benjamin's adaptation of this theory. So in his book, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, he agrees with Plato and says that yes, art can distort the truth, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all art is harmful. So he argues that the effect that art has on society depends on the context that it is placed within. And if it is placed within the right context, it can actually be used as a tool for social critique. And he makes a very distinctive argument on the role that photography and film plays in this, as they can be infinitely reproduced. And because they can be infinitely reproduced, they can reach a much wider audience than traditional forms of art, which makes it more susceptible to political use and manipulation. And so he argues that film might actually be especially destructive because of its power to create these very convincing illusions that audiences immediately accept as reality. And so he says that it's very double-edged. So in one way, it can be used to promote social awareness and expose hidden truths. But on the flip side of the coin, it can also be wielded as propaganda by aestheticizing politics and blurring the lines between reality and constructed political narratives. And before I move on, I would like to highlight that what both Benjamin and Plato have in common is that they believe that art, when it's used to evoke very strong emotional feelings, can be harmful. And with that said, I'd like to move on to Richard Wagner's concept of the total work of art. And this concept is aimed at creating an art world or a society in general by blending a multitude of different art forms. So for example, music, drama, the visual arts. And this is in an attempt to appeal to our emotions. So it contradicts both Plato and Benjamin. And whilst this approach held very revolutionary artistic potential, it also had potential for misuse, which can actually be seen later in the aestheticization of politics, and particularly in contexts where art has been used to evoke very nationalistic ideas. And that brings me to our first case study in Nazi Germany. So how did the theory of art influence the emergence of Nazism? So Nazism is actually a prime example of a means of politics that arose by appeals to human emotions rather than by reason and logic. And if you recall, this is exactly what Plato said is destructive to humanity. And on the flip side of the coin, Hitler was actually deeply influenced by Wagner, both personally and ideologically. But he was this as he was determined to create this total work of art, of an all-encompassing aesthetic experience of this mythology that glorified German nationalism. And so he would use Nazi propaganda, as you can see from these images, through music, film, photography, theater, etc., and therefore create these illusions of reality. And like Benjamin argued, he was able, through these means, to manipulate people's emotions into constructed political narratives. And Leni Riefenstahl's movie Olympia actually does a great job at showcasing this. So I'll show you a brief clip of that. As you can see through this very careful framing, editing, and the manipulation of visual symbols, Liechtenstein was able to influence viewers' emotions by creating this Aryan ideal. And so this aestheticization of politics allowed for Nazis to shape public perception and rally support through very emotionally charged visuals that glorified their ideology. And with that said, I'd like to move on to our second case study, the American Civil Rights Movement. And what the American Civil Rights Movement really highlights is art's capacity to bring marginalized voices to the forefront of social issues and actually shape social reform. So unlike the uses of art in Nazi Germany, which distorted truth for authoritarian ends, the civil rights movement actually demonstrates how art can empower communities and catalyze positive social change. And as you recall, or as you might recall, Benjamin argues that forms like film and photography, when they're accessible to the masses, can function as a powerful tool for to bring social awareness and collective mobilization. And the civil rights movement used this as one of their primary strategies to bring about social change. So through photography and television, they created these images that documented the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. Howard K. Smith is an American journalist, and in this interview, he does a really good job at explaining that. So,
was television an important factor in the civil rights battles?
Decisive. I think even people who were biased on rights saw these pictures every night at the dinner hour, beating up blacks, sicking dogs onto them, and said, this has got to stop. Something must be done. So I think that really was the decisive fact. That and the powerful will of Lyndon Johnson to have a success in legislation. Those two things did it.
Because I have an example of what was actually streamed on television.
I still have a dream.
A few months earlier, racial tensions in the Deep South had erupted. News reports carried brutal images of fire hoses blasting at the backs of school children. President Kennedy had finally seen enough. In June of 1963, he presented sweeping civil rights legislation to Congress. Dr. King and others hoped a massive yet peaceful demonstration in Washington would spur passage of the bill.
So, as you can see, the televisation of this movement, just like Benjamin argued, was able to appeal to people's emotions. And this time, it wasn't through the aestheticization of politics, but through the politicization of art, which is a bit different. And so here is where we can actually see that Plato seems to be wrong, and Benjamin's theory seems to be more accurate, where all art doesn't have to be harmful. The importance is in what context that they are framed within. And that brings me to the conclusion. So this presentation aimed at showing how the politicization of art holds a dual power. It can serve as a tool for oppression, as seen in Nazi Germany, but it can also be used as a catalyst for social progress and reform, exemplified by the civil rights movement. And so by examining both of these frameworks and their consequences, I think we can establish that the role of art in politics is essential for navigating its inevitable influence on public perception and social dynamics. And just to circle back to what I said in the beginning of the presentation, I advise you all to pay extra attention to art and its effects on politics as we enter into this new era of political uncertainty. But yeah, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have.
My first question would be whether I can push you a little bit and ask for kind of a mini case study of what's going on right now with the election of Trump. What's the role of art in that?
What's the role in art in that? Well, I think that we can see many similarities to the election this year as we have seen in 30s Germany when Hitler came into power. It's the same rhetoric that's going around, kind of the same use of propaganda and this theory to view things in their totality, to view your identity in a very total form within society instead of seeing these nuances and maybe reflecting more in a logical manner and with reason, as Plato would argue. Yeah, that's my opinion on that.
Others, questions?
I was gonna ask what made you choose the two case studies as you chose?
So actually, why I chose Nazi Germany is because we went through it in class, but also because when we went through it, I was able to see so many similarities to today. So for me, it was just more interesting to dive into that topic just because I found it relatable. And for the civil rights movement, I've always been very interested in how arts can be used for social change. And so in my opinion, I think that art is very useful for it. And so I didn't agree with Plato's theory that it's only harmful. And so the civil rights movement was a movement that I believe that has created one of the hugest social reforms in history. And so I just found that to be a very accurate representation of how art can be used in the force of good as well. Yeah.
Others? That's not the case. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone know my name is Ashley, and I will be presenting about visual representation and commodification and how it is applied to our society. Before I begin my presentation, I have a question for everyone here. Is there a specific keyword or an idea or a thought that pops up in your head when you guys perceive an image of the human body? Or do you guys relate or agree to the keyword selection? More?
Oh, yeah. So something like medical, maybe. Yeah, health, you have health there, yeah. So yes, yeah, I agree. Biology.
For me, when I perceived an image of this specific image, or when I perceive human body, I tend to actually relate directly to movements. And this is because I have a great connection to dance. I've been dancing for years, and this makes me an automatic connection to body, human body, and movements, body movements. And I want to ask the same question to the next. I want to ask the same question with this image.
Yeah. Governance, I think, is something I see there as well.
When I perceive this image, or when I perceive anyone who's wearing a military clothes, I actually tend to, I didn't put it up here, but I do think of requirement, a keyword of requirement, because back in my country, in South Korea, all Korean men, when they are around 20 to like 30, they are required to attend military for at least a year and 8 months. And therefore, whenever I perceive an image of a person who's wearing military clothes or who's a soldier, I tend to make connections to my country and a keyword requirement. And which is quite interesting because we've actually perceived the same human beings, but we tend to make additional keywords or new keywords that we think of when we perceive just two different images. And I will talk about how this is happening. And here are some inspirations that have confronted me with this topic. The Ways of Seeing by John Gruber, The Uncanny by Sigmund Freud, Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Present by Michel Foucault, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Walter Benjamin, and The Theater of the Oppressed by Augusto Boal. I will go through in depth with each one of these arts and texts. However, and I will follow in the order of these inspirations. The key question that I do want to bring throughout the presentation would be, how does the visual representation of human affect the societal structures? And I will go through in depth about birth of commodification and the commodification through visual representation and its relation to specifically art and politics in societal structures. Now, I do want to introduce the power of ideologies. Ideologies are ideas, ideals, thoughts, beliefs, the things that we think of when we perceive something, which means that whatever we perceive, so ideologies becomes a lens in what we perceive it. Therefore, whenever we perceive something, we tend to make connection to the knowledge or the ideologies we have beforehand. An example from Ways of Seeing would be photographs, where how we perceive photographs are different to how the photographer perceives a photograph. And this is because of our background ideologies and knowledges we have beforehand. We, as people who do not take the photograph, we tend to make connection to our own ideologies. Do you guys remember the photographs that we perceived in the beginning of the presentation? We tend to make connection to the ideologies that we already have beforehand. While the photographer, they may perceive different because they were in the scene, and they were in the scene of capturing the moment. So therefore, they have more knowledge behind, or I guess more detailed knowledge that had been there when they were taking the picture. And therefore, we can see that we make unintentional, automatic relation to our ideologies and what we perceive. And it's not only ideologies that actually relates to our perception, but it also interconnects with emotions. Ideologies and perceptions, they eventually evoke emotions. An example from The Uncanny by Sigmund Freud would be the feeling of uncanny, where he explained that the feeling of uncanny comes from when we perceive something familiar and we tend to connect to an ideology, a memory that was repressed and unwanted. And this connection that it makes brings to a feeling of discomfort. And this discomfort eventually evokes an emotion of the uncanny. And therefore, we can see that we cannot perceive anything rationally, taking out ideology and emotions. Now, I do want to talk about the birth of the commodification. Now, commodification was born through the process of organizing for the convenience of societal structure. An example of this would be from the Discipline and Punish, or the prison soldiers, where soldiers, they were originally people who were just physically stronger than others. The physical strength was the one that made the difference between others and soldiers. However, people wanted organization, people wanted to remove inconvenience. And this process of removing inconvenience eventually made our ideologies and ideologies of soldiers and our soldier identity and images of military and soldiers and this is because of our intention of organizing the army for the convenience. And this eventually became a selling identity, how we eventually sell the identity, the image, the ideologies that was born through the process of organization of societal structures. And I do want to talk about how this commodification is continued. Still on this slide.
Oh, sorry. So sorry.
We tend to actually have commodification continuously through the repetition of education. So education, it continuously applies new ideas, new ideologies through educating modified and organized societal ideologies for the improvement and convenience of learning and making advanced, improved societal structures. And art actually presents or mimics the same role as education, where from Walter Benjamin, he presented that art is continuously reproduced. However, it cannot bring the same original element it had with the original artwork. And this eventually shows that they're modified, which means that they are actually changed in the perception. And this new perception it brings eventually can be applied to an idea to bring more organization and societal functioning and political functioning for the convenience. And an example for the work of art would be the theater of the oppressed. So the theater of the oppressed is quite different to our original ideas with theaters. For theater of the oppressed, it's when the audience actually stand up on stage and they act in the perspective of people who were struggling from societal issues. They do not have any scripts and they're just presented in a scenery where there's an actual societal issue presented up there. And this allows the audiences to be in the perspective of people who are struggling from societal issues. And this allows people to understand, but this way of understanding is also a modified version of understanding, because we tend to, the audiences who go up on stage weren't the people who actually experienced the societal struggles, which means that they tend to make connections to their own ideologies and knowledges they have beforehand. Therefore, they cannot understand 100% of the people who actually struggled in societal struggles. However, this brings in a political act, where even though they weren't able to 100% fully understand the struggle, they were able to be in the perspective, and they were able to at least understand and obtain knowledge, ideologies of their perspectives. And this allows to bring active movements such as like protesting, and eventually this work of art becomes a political art. And I want to conclude saying that I cannot find a solution to remove commodifications, since it has been continuously been done till now. And as mentioned, it's also through education, which means that according to what we have right now, we cannot completely remove commodification. And it is a difficult task because according to what we went through, the only way to completely remove commodification is to separate ideologies we have and the emotions that we evoke from. And this is quite impossible according to what we know. So I want to leave with the question of how can we actually at least try to remove commodification? And
Thank you. Okay, questions. While you think about it, I already have two. The first one is, so No, I start with my simple question. My simple question, that is maybe a difficult one to answer, but still I'm interested. You have worked through so many different texts, and I wanted to know which of the authors impressed you the most? Which one did you think was, or taught you the most, maybe? Brought you to completely new ideas, maybe? What would you say?
I think it was, I forgot the author's name, but,
I can go back to your slide if you want to.
it's
Discipline and punish. Okay.
also the ways of seeing,
Uh-huh.
and also the theater. Those three were actually very inspiring to me, and this is because I've never actually thought in a way that they actually presented. Commodification, I actually didn't really have a deep understanding before I actually went through this topic. I was only interested in figuring out about how we perceive human body because I was interested in human body so much from my experience of dancing. But it was the way that the commodification came through till now from the organization of societal for the convenience of society was an eye-opening idea for me. And ways of seeing the photography, the photographer perception and our perception, how it differs. I always had that in mind, but it never actually it never actually like driven me anywhere before. It was just like there in my head, oh, it would be different, but I didn't actually like have a deep think about that. And the theater of the oppressed, it was kind of a combination of everything. But when I was first introduced to this work, I only perceived I actually saw a video of this, how this worked out. And I actually applied the theater of the oppressed from the works that I actually read. So it was a nice and interesting connection that I could make.
Cool. Very cool. Karl, go ahead.
Not a question, but for the way of seeing, I think it's really interesting because it's kind of the same in film where it's like on set you see everything that's happening, you see like all the errors and all the things that go on, but I also edit a lot, so I'm thrown footage sometimes that like I have no idea what happened. It's really interesting. You just have to deal with like one side of it, or you see everything that happened in the United States.
Go ahead, Garrison.
There's so many different authors and so many different readings, and I was wondering what the order of, like, what order you went through those to kind of come to your thoughts and when they started to develop.
I actually, it's quite, so I started with this one actually, the Theater of the Oppressed. I was introduced to this work in the beginning of the semester from a different class. So I knew what it was, but I didn't really have a deep thinking to this topic. And then I perceived, ways of seeing. This was also through a different class that I read. And yeah, this actually began, this was the reading that actually made me start wondering about this topic because of the connection that it made with the Theater of the Oppressed. And then it led to a connection to.
You already said in the end of your talk that you don't have a final answer. So what we can do to get rid of forms of commodification, but still I'm interested whether you have maybe, if you don't quite, and nobody maybe knows a route to achieve that, if you have some form of utopia, what the world would be like without it. Maybe in connection to Karl's dystopian worlds, what would be your utopian world in a generation from now? What would that look like? Do you have ideas about that?
I've actually never thought of that before, but I feel like people would just be a little, I guess, stupid, because the whole process of this was from education and organizing for the convenience and for the structure to be made. But if we actually remove modification, the result of this whole process, then that would mean that this process, even though we don't have an end, this process would have been taken longer, which means that education wouldn't have been there enough to actually have a modification at the end. So I think people would be quite stupid basically, if there aren't a birth of the commodification, because they won't have any knowledge about it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have a last one, because in the beginning you were talking about how you dance, and you're covering so many different topics in this presentation. I was just wondering, did that influence your choice for presentation?
Yes, it did. I tried my best to actually like major in dance and wanted to do dance as my career. But I realized how, my story, I realized how dance, it wasn't what I thought it would be, because dance was kind of a way for me to escape from the issues that I had in my real life, with my back in high school, like my homeworks and everything. It was just a way to escape from my stresses that I had. And when I tried to learn dance professionally, I felt like I was just like in a small box where I couldn't really express and could actually express my struggles, which was quite different to my original intention of dance. And this is why I came here to Pratt and instead of doing dance. And I realized how it was this topic was very interesting to me with it made a connection to my dance. It's because I like to perceive dance, but I always tend to think of specific ideologies that are connected to dance. And it is also interesting how some specific dance movements or specific dance performances, they tend to relate to an ideology, and this is what it makes the specific dance or the piece of choreography to be so superior. And I wanted to figure out why this happening. And even though I think dance also is related to commodification, the human commodification, where we make movements and we call that an art, and we call that a specific video of product. And I don't know, there's a lot of things that actually relates to my understanding of dance, which that I cannot connect everything to it, but I was interested in the fact how we perceive dance is also going through some kind of commodification.
Okay, one more, but then we have to move on. Go ahead.
Well, this is just a comment. I think I thought of another word to put next to the soldier, which would be rigidity. And I thought that it was interesting talking so much about body commodification and like what you're saying about dance, where it's like something to escape and using like free form dance, more so just like freedom of movement. I feel like it's interesting to me that you chose soldier as an image for that. That's kind of the opposite. It's like having a lot of rigidity and this that would be the word I would put on.
You want to react to that? Can you respond?
The intention of this beginning of this presentation was to actually make everyone kind of acknowledge how our perception of our different individual ideologies make us intimate connection and which are different to everyone. So it's interesting how I can see how you guys make connections to your ideology and perception.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hey everybody, as you know, I'm Brandon, and today I'll be doing my final presentation, and today I'll be talking about the body as political and visual culture. The overall central question of my project is, presentation actually, how do visual representations of the human body reinforce or challenge political power structures as well as social and societal norms? In exploring this very, very complex, in-depth topic, I've drawn from various readings and theories to investigate exactly how bodies, whether it be in art, media, or protest, become sites of political expression. Today, we'll see how different visual portrayals intersect with issues of race, gender, as well as power dynamics. To illustrate these specific points, I'll be using examples from Angela Davis's activism, especially her the fro, the afro that African Americans use to escape from the shackles placed on them by white society, as well as key art moments and various forms of visual culture that highlight exactly how the body can be used to uphold or resist societal norms. Today, let's dive in and explore how this relationship coincides in more detail. And here's my first slide for it. It's a little bit hard to show. Here it is. I'll send a link with it. The body as political visual culture. Here it is. Here's the first one. So in slide 2, the title of my slide 2 is historical background. And historical context, actually, sorry. Initially, let's start with this. Let's look at the historical context of the body as political. The use of the body as a political symbol is not new. Nothing new at all. It's been dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Throughout history, the body has always been a representation of power, authority, and even sometimes resistance. In ancient Greece, for example, sculptures portray the human body in its idealized form, symbolizing the power and excellence that the society valued in Greece. Fast forward to the Renaissance era, and we see a resurgence of similar ideals. For example, Michelangelo's David. The glorification of the human form was also a reflection of political and religious power. However, beyond glorification, the body has also served as a very powerful site of resistance. Marginalized groups throughout history have used their bodies as symbols of defiance against oppressive powers. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement, individuals such as Angela Davis turned their physical presence into a political statement. Angela Davis used her body, primarily her hair, her afro, as a political tool to symbolize resilience against racial and societal injustices, as well as her visual representation becoming iconic in movements against systemic oppression. And more on Angela Davis, essentially what it was, she adopted, or she actually created the afro, the hairstyle. And that was, she did that as a way for African Americans to have something that they stand by, that signifies who they are, to break free of white America's societal norms and such. But over time, it's been whittled down. Initially, it was a sort of symbol, like, hey, we're African American, we're proud. But over time, it's got whittled down to Angela Davis and her hairstyle being called the fro. Nothing more than a political symbol, just the fro. So, yeah. For my third slide, it'll be about power. For my second slide, here's my image. I'll probably stop doing this to not waste time. But for my third slide, I'll be talking about power dynamics and control and visual culture. I have an attached video that it will be in the link that I send you. So now for the third slide, I'd prefer we focus on how visual culture reflects power dynamics. For example, Michael Foucault talks about how power is not held just by governments, but is also exercised through various forms of surveillance as well as societal expectations. This idea directly relates to how our bodies are represented visually, whether in advertisements, films, or even social media, as we see many times nowadays through Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, you name it. When we see images of powerful men portrayed in suits or dominant poses, for example, or even women in passive and aesthetic roles, these visuals are not just telling us a simple story, however, they're conditioning us. They're reinforcing what's considered normal or ideal societal norms. These representations create internalized expectations, how we should look, act, or be. But again, we don't have to conform to this. This is what society is telling us is right and just. Judith Butler, for example, also brings in the concept of performativity, suggesting that gender is essentially a performance influenced by visual culture. Again, for example, the way advertisements and films consistently portray men as physically strong and assertive, while women are shown as graceful or submissive, reinforces deeply rooted societal norms that tell us how to behave based on our gender. I'll skip this. I'll skip the visuals for now. For slide 4, I will be talking about gender and the body, which are a double standard. Now I would want to change subjects and put it on gender. One of the major themes we see in visual culture is the double standard in how men's and women's bodies are treated. For instance, I want you guys to all think about something as simple as being shirtless in public. Men can be shirtless, we can be shirtless whenever we want, nobody will bat an eye, not even a single bit. However, women face societal and legal consequences, public nudity, bad legal stuff for the exact same act. This is because we as a society over-sexualize and objectify women's bodies, and men's bodies are not subject to the same scrutiny or the same gaze at all. We can be shirtless. As you mentioned in class, actually, Professor Dege, the man you saw, very good physique. You're like, wow, great physique, but shirtless again, running on a run. Women can't do that. We can. It's not right. It's not just. It's not cool at all. Moreover on that, Laura Mulvey's concept of the male gaze explains exactly why part of this happens. The male gaze refers to the way visual culture is structured around a masculine viewer, which leads to the sexualization and objectification of women. In film, art, and media, women are often presented as visual objects of visual pleasure rather than as full subjects or, human beings. This specific objectification limits women's freedom to present themselves in the exact same ways that men do. It's not only about nudity, it is about power and it is about lack of freedom. It is about who gets to define how bodies are presented and how certain actions, like going shirtless, are either normalized or criminalized based on gender. How shallow is that? Now for slide 5, I will be talking about the body as a tool for resistance. I believe that the body is not only a site for oppression, it can also be a very powerful tool for resistance. Throughout history, people have used their physical presence to challenge power, structures, and demand justice. I would want us to circle back to Angela Davis for another phenomenal example. By using her own physical presence at rallies, marches, and even in her courtroom appearances when she got brought to court, Angela Davis has transformed her body, specifically her hair, her fro, into a symbol of strength and resistance. Her afro, her stance, her voice, all these elements coincided with one another to become visual markers of defiance against racial and gender inequality. The body is also used in protest movements as a direct challenge to those in power. Hunger strikes, marches, sit-ins, these are all just a few ways that people have used their physicality to resist. The vulnerability of the human body is a fantastic thing, and in these contexts becomes a form of power. The idea is that bodies en masse can disrupt the status quo and make visible the injustices that are often ignored and overshadowed, you name it. For slide 6, I will be talking about art as a political statement. In this slide, I'm focusing on how art is playing a role in the political representation of the body. Visual art is uniquely capable of challenging norms and questioning societal values. Consider works, for example, from the Civil Rights Movement era. Artworks have portrayed the struggle and highlighted the humanity of African American, Afro-Latino individuals, colored individuals. Art has a fantastic ability to capture the body in such a way that communicates both power and vulnerability. The artist becomes a mediator, allowing us to see the body not just as an aesthetic object, but as a political symbol that, represents something. For instance, artists who painted protest scenes or depicted marginalized communities were not just creating images, they were engaging in something more. They were engaging in a political act, using art as a form of resistance. The representation of the body in art and visual culture help us reshape narratives about power, oppression, and the possibilities of change. Art, why do we create art? Why do artists make art? To, again, show who they are and have it express who they are, express their thoughts, their ideals, their feelings. Art is, honestly, in my belief, one of the best ways for expressing what's on your mind, state of the world. Art is exactly whatever the creator wants to be. The artist can make it that way and can make it known to the masses. I feel this way. Let me express it through something. Let me paint something, draw something, create a picture. Art has the power to send messages in a way that speaking cannot. It's through a deeper meaning, and I find that, I'm not an artist myself, but I find that phenomenal. I find that very, very engaging, and I really believe in art as a, as a political object. And for my 7th slide, my title of the 7th slide is Future Implications for Visual Culture. So I'll be focusing on questions and whatnot for you guys, asking you guys questions about the future of visual culture. So overall, the body is deeply intertwined with political expression in visual culture. Whether glorified, sexualized, or used as a site of resistance, the body communicates messages about power, identity, and control. Throughout this presentation, we've seen very, very clearly and vividly how Angela Davis used her physical presence as a political statement, how the male gaze, thank you Laura Mulvey, shapes representation of women's bodies, and how art plays a very vital and crucial role in challenging societal norms. The portrayal of the body in visual culture is very, very powerful as it reflects and shapes our understanding of identity, power, and resistance. As we, as a society, we as a whole, we as a class even, move forward, it is very important to ask ourselves, how can we be more critical of the images we consume, and how might future visual representations challenge current power dynamics more effectively? Thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear your questions or thoughts on these topics. Thank you guys. Professor Dege, if you have any questions at all, please email me, reach out to me, anything. So in what I'll be sending you, I have my 7 slides. My 3rd slide has a video. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for letting me speak, letting me record this. I really appreciate it, Professor Dege. Have a great rest of your day. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on my presentation. Thank you.
Covering dystopic landscapes and conquest of nature, and we're going to be focusing on 2 movies. One of them is Children of Men, and one of them is Blade Runner. So, the big things that really interested me about this were just why do we make a story that is kind of really uncomfortable to deal with, and it's just like a dystopia, not a utopia. And then also, why do we find relatability in the stories? How do we find relatability in the stories? And something that these films really did for me was they explore like human purpose in a really interesting way, what it means to make us human, and why to find the kind of scream to reject. And why do we want to live? But I'm not really gonna try to answer all the questions I'm giving, which is really not sometimes. But both these films do have an oppressed subject, which is similarity. In Children of Men, it's mainly women refugees, because the women are forced to take infertility tests. The refugees are not being let into this, into the UK, where it's the only place that hasn't fallen. And yeah, and then in Blade Runner, it's the replicants who just really want to live. They're wanting to kill that. So yeah, moving on to Blade Runner, it's directed by Ridley Scott, who did Alien, Gladiator, and also second Gladiator, which comes out this Friday. And we're gonna start by just showing a trailer.
Kind of nervous when I take tests.
I've got 4 skin jobs walking the streets.
They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem.
I'm Rachel.
Deckard.
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
No.
I need the old Blade Runner. This is a bad one.
How can it not know what it is?
If only you could see what I've seen.
More human than human is our motto.
What if I go north? Disappear. Would you come after me?
No, you won't. but somebody would.
It's too bad she won't live.
I can see you. Time to die.
Will you help us? What seems to be the problem?
Death. I want more life.
An experiment. Nothing more. Nothing more. More human than human is our motto.
Right, so, I think the main thing I got out of Blade Runner is just that it kind of questions what, defines what a human is, and it does a really interesting where it just creates an inhuman, entirely. It makes a thing that is born into purpose instead of like a human that has to find their purpose, but it also has like its rebirth, it escapes this off-world planet where they're slaves to a system, and they have to kind of figure it out. And the government really just is oppressing that because maybe it's out of fear for like this new thing that they don't really know what to do with it. They don't know if they let them be a part of society that it'll be okay or if they're gonna fight back or something. But they have these Blade Runners which hunt the replicants just for the fact that they want to live and they want to function in society. And it battles with this idea that only humans can be human, even though this android looks like a human, acts like a human, talks like a human, and essentially is a human from a observational standpoint, but they're still hunted and killed. So next movie I'm gonna be showing is Children of Men by Alfonso Cuarón, who did Gravity, Prisoner of Azkaban, and also Roma more recently. And I'm also gonna show a trailer for that.
I can't really remember when I last had any hope. And I certainly can't remember when anyone else did either. Because really, since women stopped being able to have babies, what's left to hope for?
The world was stunned today by the death of Diego Ricardo, the youngest person on the planet. The youngest person on Earth was 18 years, 4 months, 20 days, 16 hours, and 8 minutes old.
The ultimate mystery. Why are women infertile? Some say it's genetic experiments, pollution. Why do you think we can't make babies anymore?
Doesn't matter. It's all over in 50 years. It's too late.
Move along! Move along!
Hello, Theo. How have you been? I'm sorry about the theatrics. Police have been a pain lately.
I haven't seen you for nearly 20 years.
Need your help. Not for me, a girl. Need to get her to the coast, past security checkpoints. It's hard for me to look at you. He had your eyes.
So why did you come to me?
I trust you. Show him.
Now you know what's at stake.
We have to meet the boat.
What is this boat?
The Human Project have sent a boat.
The Human Project?
Yes, the greatest minds in the world working for a new society.
Your baby is the miracle the whole world has been waiting for.
We will find a way to get you to the Human Project, I promise you.
We're almost there, Keil. We're almost there.
so I think this is a lot like Blade Runner, where it's all about finding purpose. But this person kind of goes through this odyssey, and he has all this apathy, and he's just like, why am I doing this? And he's presented with something that's kind of keeping him going. And I think, sorry. I think this is also just a great opposite to Blade Runner, where in Blade Runner, it's kind of a manufactured nature. Everything's being made by man, and it's not really letting nature do its thing. Everything's just kind of synthetic. And in this, it's kind of just nature's going against everything, and how is everybody going to react to that? But I think the main thing this question is, film questions, is why live if they're just going to be extinct? And I think it's a little bit too ambiguous to answer, just because there's so many reasons. For him, it's that he finds this new hope, but for a lot of others, it's that they have this apathy, they're just going to live the rest of their life and just forget about it. For other people, it's just all this anger that they have and they just want to get it out, but it's still very short-sighted in a way. And this also brings a question of why are women infertile, which nobody knows. It's just that there's been a sudden stop in the regression that nobody can explain. And instead of keeping on the progressive Blade Runner, it's the opposite. I think this also battles with human purpose a lot. I already said that, sorry. But these films are both really great for like, what is the human condition and experience? And I think it's just an impossible question to answer. And there is a sequence that I do really wish I put in here that is all about when the baby is born, and Clive Owen's character, he escorts the woman out into this war zone. And when everybody starts to hear the baby and like stop and look at it, they just stop. And when they leave, when they get out of this war zone, it just all continues. It's like if they're just trying to finish what they started or something. It's a really great sequence that I wish I put in here. I think both of these are really battling with something that nobody has really seen, at least in real life, where one is just like the stopping progression with children and men. Nobody knows why. It's been the same for like since the beginning of time. All this, how we reproduce and how humans progress. And in Blade Runner, it's kind of like the birth of a new man. It's just, and we have to like accommodate to that. But I think that these two films can really be compared to, especially today in America, but also past America. Blade Runner, I think, is great for visualizing slavery, where somebody has been oppressed in America since forever, and 200 years ago, those were slaves. And today, I think that's more women and immigrants. And I think Children of Men is great for that as well. It shows us something that is happening today with abortion rights and women's health and bodily autonomy. And they're both great for that, because Blade Runner is showing somebody who can't societally have autonomy, but has it, and they've learned that. And these also just have us question what makes us human by nature, whether it's in Blade Runner, it's maybe just our DNA, or whether it's how we act in society. And in Children of Men, it's if we can progress as humans, if we can reproduce and make the future. That's all I have. So I'm gonna wrap this up. You can go on the next slide. Yeah, thank you. I hope it was enjoyable, but I do think I could have added some more.
You're good. Questions while you think about what you want to ask, or you have one already. If that's not the case, then I'll quickly ask something. Can you speak a little bit more about your, and I'm assuming that fascination with utopian / dystopian movies? Specifically, with those two, I just only realized. So Blade Runner plays in the future of, what was it, 2017, 2019? So in the past now. But from the point it was made, it was a future, but not a too distant future, like, so a reachable future, not like, I don't know, Star Trek that plays in the 22nd century or whatever. And the same is true with Children of Man, where it doesn't specify a time, but they say a generation from now, right? So it's, both of these are kind of sort of around the corner. So I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit more about why you find this way of telling a story fascinating. You have ideas about that?
I don't know. I think that they're just really interesting because they just show us like a human experience. They just show how people live in like some world, and you might not see it initially, but it kind of makes you think like, oh, these people are living like this. I'm living like this, but that's the future. What if that's how I'm gonna live like 20 years from now?
Other questions?
I guess, I just thought it was interesting that it's relevant and it feels relevant, or at least it really piques your interest and probably everyone else's interest. Like movies that feel so dystopian and are questioning humanity and are questioning like whether or not we'll have freedom or bodies, right? People bodies. I feel like it's interesting that a lot of the things that you see in those movies, they might seem crazy, but they are actually becoming more and more relevant as like time goes on. Almost. There's like a false destination, like it's not actually a real place in the future, it's made up, but it feels like as time goes on, we're moving towards there. Which is kind of more than two questions.
No, the comments are fine. It's totally good. Others wanna chime in? Yeah, go ahead.
What made you choose Blade Runner out of all of the dystopian movies and such?
I just like it like a lot, and I think there's a lot just like unpacking. Yeah, that's really all.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you.
As you guys know, I'm Garrison. I'm gonna give an autoethnographic presentation about an encounter that I had with disillusionment as an artist from New York, or living in New York. So anyone that might not know what an autoethnographic presentation is, it is just gonna be basically me talking about my personal experience with this subject that I chose. And there's gonna be a little bit of storytelling. And I'd recommend to keep in mind Walter Benjamin's Art and Mechanical Reproduction, his concept of history, and John Cage's How to Improve the World, You'll Just End Up Making Things Worse. I'll start my story when I was just 18 out of high school. I had plans to attend a city college in Santa Barbara, but just before I was supposed to leave, I decided to get a job for my uncle doing construction. Save up some money and then move to New York as a music producer. And I worked probably 70 to 80 hour work weeks for about 4 months. And every single day I was thinking about New York. When I finally got here, I made music every single day. And I remember I would finish songs and I would be like shaking with this like sort of electricity. And I would show my friends something that I made, and I was like, it felt like I was showing them that I could fly. And making music, when I was in a state of creation, it was like I had these little veins going from the surroundings into my skin and my brain. And it was like anything that happened around me, I would notice it immediately. And mistakes were sort of like a gold mine. And I think that friends and definitely people in the industry, or the music industry, started to notice me for that and told me how special it was. And so for that reason, I started to protect it like I was sort of its guardian. And I was friends with a lot of people in New York that had a grip on something in the creative industry. And being around them, I saw a lot of commodification happen, and I saw a lot of people that I know participating in it. And I started to develop a strange split between hating them for participating in it, but also being happy for them and wanting a chance for myself to do the same. And so to be something in that world that I knew was accessible, I thought of myself as more of a standalone, self-sufficient type of authenticity that that I knew was rare, and I knew that I didn't know at the time, but I guess in my case, it ended up being sort of short-lived. But I did tell myself that I was this unshakable, authentic person in the world, and I thought it was unshakable, but there was definitely a shift starting to happen. And I think I made this painting at the time when the shift started to happen. I was in a place where I was completely dependent on my creative process and dependent on creating things. And I would make music every day. Without fail, I'd get into that state of extreme presence. And it felt like I felt like I had superpowers. And I think that at this time, I was also starting to notice how delicate my connection was to my creative process. And I knew I had to have some sort of input and then another sort of output to be making things. And I didn't like my source of input. So instead of participating in culture, I started to limit my exposure to it and work in an echo chamber. And so the words in the top right, if you're on the screen or it's right here, they read, reeling in the line, it goes beneath the clouds. I'm in a room full of mirrors with a flashlight. Why open the door? So the structure on the left is what I thought was my creative process. And you can see it goes beneath the surface of the clouds, and all the mechanisms are this set of pulleys connected to a line, and it's pulling this fish out of a body of water. And so the fish is the product of whatever I'm working towards, and I'm at the end of the line, kind of reeling it in. And at the time, I knew how sensitive this was, and I thought that this was kind of a resemblance of how glorious it was to have this superpower. And I thought that, this was me kind of allowing myself to illustrate it. So looking at it now, it's kind of sad to me, but because it was sort of the moment that I decided to close the door to the outside world, and it was looking at it like, in perspective now, it especially impacts me because for months after this, I started to lose my creative process. So I couldn't access it. But I stuck to my guns about my theory about how culture is toxic, and started to become more of an assumption about culture and a lack of consideration for its possibilities. The longer this went on, the angrier I got, and the further I got from art and music. I was kind of left feeling disillusioned and hopeless and bitter. But I ended up not having the ability to see authenticity at all or be authentic myself. And I'd say for about 3 years following the time that I made this painting, I probably have over 100 journal entries where I was desperately trying to figure out a way to reconnect with music and art. And I had these long talks with my close friends at a diner where I would vent to them, and I would try to think about ways to escape my failed attempts at making something. And at night I would feel pretty depressed and alone, thinking that I was deteriorating along with my ability to connect with music and art. But I still didn't want to engage. All I saw was everything boiled down to aesthetics, and I told myself that I was not going to participate in that, and I saw myself as something more than that. I know now that this was a form of misguided protection and disillusionment. When I read Walter Benjamin for the first time, it was definitely the word aura that grabbed my attention immediately. He describes aura as the unique quality of a work of art that comes from the moment in time and space it was created. And this is a type of art that someone engages with on an intimate level, even spiritual. And through that engagement, you start to develop a sense of perception, sense of place, an ideology. And mechanically reproduced art doesn't have this quality. In my head, it works the same way as a joke, where you can repeat the punchline, but if you repeat it out of context, it's just not that funny. I think you had to be there moment. I feel like I need to admit that I did have a misconception here, where I boiled this down to art is empty and authenticity needs to be protected, which is probably just me trying to validate isolating myself. But his writing does go much further than that. In his concept of history, he talks about the ways that we think about history and how it contributes to our understanding of the present and the future, where we think of it as a tool for telling the future, as if history and time is something that unfolds like an equation without variables. We see it as something that might be predetermined, giving us the notion that we didn't have a say in what we were doing, what happened in the past, the atrocities of the past, and would then give us the notion that we don't have a say in what happens in the present or the future. And the present moment is not reproducible under any circumstances. Each moment is different, leading us to slightly different destinations. So although we can recognize patterns, history still does not unfold. And Benjamin argues that it's actually a series of disruptions, and he calls those disruptions ruptures. He says by looking at history from the perspective of marginalized people, those ruptures are much easier to see because the people with power visibly just didn't act. And to see history in this way is to understand that the present moment carries this immense potential. And building on top of that, it's also understanding that our autonomy is inherently attached to the present moment. Free will is only something that we can use in the now. And to see that moment, you can't be looking backwards at something that you once had, or I once had, or you'll lose a sense of the present moment and lose your autonomy. For another class, I read an essay by Miriam Hansen called Benjamin's Aura, where she pretty much addressed the exact misconception that I had and blamed it on the fact that Benjamin used traditional art as a way of understanding what aura is, and it's a representation of aura, which makes the reader feel more of a loss rather than a sense of potential for change or a transformation. She says that instead of a loss, aura of the modern age of mass consumption is given the chance for recontextualization to reactivate genuine modes of imagination and perception. Miriam Hansen definitely helped me see this, but it's all in Benjamin's writing. With his concept of aura, that his concept of aura is actually something of a crossroads. With mass consumption, aura is given the chance to transform into either a tool for totalitarian regimes, like Kayla said, or something of a superpower to empower the masses and the individual. But with my experience, all I saw was art and aura being used as a tool for capitalism, like everyone had to play the game. And this was my misconception about Benjamin's work. And I couldn't see the transformation of aura, all I could see was its flaws. And in many ways, I think that my misconception itself was a continuation of how hard I was hung up on what I had in the past. I think I also had this misconception about my own art and my place in the world. My connection to art was intimate and intertwined with my life as it happened. When I moved to New York, I wasn't ready to let it change, but my life was changing. So the two started to part ways. And as time went on, I tried to nourish myself with memories of what had already happened. Going back to the painting, I'm in a room full of mirrors with a flashlight. Why I opened the door. It was all grounded in the idea that I didn't need light from the outside. But the light from my flashlight is not real sunlight, and by the time that I see it and it hits me, it's just an upside down image of what has already happened. It removes all spontaneity from the present moment. It makes the present moment completely inaccessible. And the sooner this goes on, the longer this goes on, the sooner that there's no potential for change. There is no spontaneity, and everything becomes flat. Looking back at it now, I can't believe that I didn't actually think about what it would be like to be in a room full of mirrors with a flashlight and no way out. What really got me to the point of presenting in this way and coming to the conclusion that I came to was John Cage's How to Improve the World, You'll Just Make Matters Worse. He talks here about how attempting to improve the world is silly because it's always going to be misguided. Cage's idea here is similar to Benjamin's idea about history, where an idea of an improved future is a destination along a linear path, but a linear path doesn't actually exist. And Cage's idea is actually more of an application to the individual and the artistic practice. He embraces the chaos of the world as inherent to the world. And he says that by embracing chaos, by embracing chaos, it gives you the freedom from misguided fighting and allows you to be present. Because the present is filled with this chaos and unpredictability. In those moments, as Benjamin says too, is where all potential exists. And these same things apply to making art. If you are dead set on a product, you won't see the opportunities that come with mistakes or any adjacent ideas. You'll just spend your time erasing them. So I'd say that regardless of all of these readings and ideas, thoughts, I do think that the mechanism that I encountered that leads to disillusionment is very easily set in motion right now as an artist, especially in New York. It still feels like no matter how intimately I connect with something, whether it's music, art, or a movie, there's an equal and opposite force that's pushing me away. And for me, that force that pushes me away is capitalism. It feels like it absorbs everything and warps my perception of it. And when I feel that push, I want to push back. But sooner or later, I find myself in a place where I'm fighting a fight that's completely independent of what I originally wanted. Because what I originally wanted is to feel what I had. And what I did have before was feeling something in the present. So in some ways, by fighting that fight, I was trying to change something and just ended up making matters worse, as John Cage says. I was the mechanical reproduction of my own aura. My craving for authenticity of the past is exactly what takes me away from seeing authenticity in the present. And I took away the potential for seeing anything but disillusionment and any chance to give myself the essence of being present and the essence of what I once had, which was being present. And the result doesn't just hurt me, it hinders our ability to connect and allow art to become what we all hope for, a power for the people and a power for the masses and the individual. So last Thursday, I had a great time presenting, but I noticed an aura around my presentation that I really liked. And I think that it came from not practicing it on Zoom. And so for the sake of not clinging onto something of the past that has already happened and trying to recreate it, I figured I should do something different. So
these arms of mine, they are lonely, lonely and feeling blue. These arms of mine, they are yearning from wanting you. And if you will let them hold arms of mine, they are burning, burning from wanting you. These arms of mine, they are wanting, wanting to hold you. And if you would let them hold you, oh, how grateful I would be. Just be my little woman. Just be my lover. I need somebody, somebody to treat me right. And I need your arms, your loving arms to hold me tight. And I need your tender lips to hold me and tell me that it's alright.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Questions? I have a very simple one that I start out with. In what way, in the process that you went through, in what way did letting go of things play a role? Does that make sense?
I think that it was more so, when I was talking about how seeing nothing in culture became more of a assumption about things rather than actually looking at things. I think that I started to sort of shut down. And I think that, I remember a couple weeks ago, I did this weird thing where I was trying to practice letting go of things rather than trying to hold on to things so hard. And I feel like I was trying to, and I think that might have been what I was talking about, where I was saying my misconception came from holding on to this thing that I had rather than trying to just be present, which was what I was doing in the past. And I don't know, I feel like that was kind of me practicing that. Or I also did it on the street. I just asked some guy to video me singing Frank Sinatra song. And it didn't end up working, but
it did not end up.
No, he didn't click play. He didn't click the video.
Oh, but that is cool. So it's not reproducible.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Yeah. And I was gonna play that song that I sent you, but then I thought, since the same thing, I brought the painting instead of showing a picture, I should just do something.
No. Yeah. That's very cool.
So is the representation of you saying, is that part of you letting go?
I think so, yeah. I don't know. Well, when I sent you the song, I sent you a song that I made, which was a cover of the song. And I thought that, I don't know, since it was a cover, there was something there. I don't know, there's something there. And then I thought about how, when I made that song, it felt like I was starting to break out of this disillusionment.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like also that same song, that song was probably one of the only songs that I started singing to myself in the shower, really loud. And I don't know, it seems like at that time when I was starting to play those songs, my parents also got a karaoke machine, and at home we would do karaoke. And it felt like at that time I was starting to break out that sort of thing. So I felt like that was kind of maybe just, and since it's a personal kind of intimate presentation style, I feel like it would be kind of good to do something like that. Yeah.
Other question, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one. First of all, loved the performance. That was amazing. I think so. My question is, because you said that you in the past when you were working, you were very much in the present and very much within yourself, that you could just come up with these ideas or whatever. And then once you moved to New York, you were confronted with a more capitalist market, right? And you saw how that changed you. And so I don't know, maybe you mentioned this, but I was just wondering, so now when you work, do you feel like that capitalist market, because you said that you're kind of molding into everything that's happening here, is it more of an advantage to you now, or do you still reject it? Or how do you, I don't know.
I feel like I still haven't figured it out. Like, I don't think that I figured it out at all, but I do think that, I don't know, some other things that I've been thinking about recently is kind of like the master-slave dialectic, where it's like you can't, well, I forget who wrote this. I'm sure that
There you
you
go.
know better than me. No, not, I'm thinking of another one, where some author says, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools, something like that. Anyways, I just feel like I've been trying to fight against this thing, this disillusionment. Oh, hi, Stephanie.
I have that for you. So
Yeah,
that was
she-
Audre
that was her
Lorde.
class, yeah.
Hi, nice to see you. We did Audre Lorde together last week, and that was the text, the master's house. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Right. And so I figured, like, if you're not fighting against the master so much, which in my case, I feel like is capitalism, then I'm gonna end up in a fight that's completely independent of what I originally wanted. So I feel like for me right now, I feel like all I know is that, like, I need to start trying to reconnect the present. And I feel like that's that's the essence of what I'm trying to do. That's the fight that I want to fight, rather than trying to think of myself as something that's separate from it. And I think in another essay that I'm writing for her class, I'm getting more into that part, where it's like accepting the fact that capitalism is already inside of you, that kind of thing. Some Mark Fisher stuff and some Filippo Berardi stuff. But yeah.
Okay. Cool. Other questions?